So this happened only a couple of months ago, and I'm still quite on edge about it. I had a group of friends that lived about an hour and a half away from me, and I would frequently go and hang out with them. The drive never really bothered me, but after this particular night, I've now come to dread it. So, I first noticed the car about 20 minutes into my trip home. It was about 2 a.m, so not many cars were on the road, and this guy was practically riding my bumper, which I thought was strange because there were no other cars out. I quickly wrote it off though, and just thought that this guy was a bit of an arsehole and turned back into my music. The time on the freeway is about 55 minutes, I'd say, and he was behind me the entirety of it. When I saw that he was getting off at the same exit, I must admit that I got a little bit anxious, but I told myself that I was just being paranoid and that there was nothing to worry about. I was heading home as I normally would until I noticed that this car was making every turn right behind me. I started turning down random roads too to test my theory of them following me, and just as I suspected, they were trailing behind me. I stopped going towards my house at this point and started just driving randomly, trying to think of what to do. I tried whipping down roads at the last second, but that didn't work either. I actually ended up driving through red lights and stop signs because I was scared of what would happen if I stopped. I was desperate at this point, so I called the police and told them that I was being followed for over an hour now. I gave them a description of the car and my location, and the dispatcher told me to drive to the police station and there would be officers waiting in the parking lot there. And as I turned into the parking lot, what do you know, the car sped off. One of the police cruisers immediately flipped on their lights and followed them too, and I stayed at the police station and gave my statement. I also followed up with the police station after not getting a call for some time, and the officer that I spoke to said that he wouldn't go into detail, but apparently there was a lot of meth found in the man's car, along with some very sharp weapons, and he is now in jail. So my boyfriend and I were visiting a few friends in Richmond, Virginia. We went with another couple and decided to get an Airbnb together. The other couple that we went with picked out the Airbnb, but they hadn't really been to the RVA before, so the place they picked was about 15 or 20 minutes outside of the city centre. It was a bit of a pain in the arse, I admit, but it wasn't a big deal. The neighbourhood was nice and the house was okay, so all was good. When we got to the house, it seemed really, well, I can't really describe it. It was nice enough, and we were only staying for a weekend, and the owner even left us some banana bread, but there was just this odd vibe about it. A bit of a creepy vibe. For example, when I put our stuff in our bedroom, I opened up the closet and there was nothing in there but a chair. Not like a fold-up chair, but like a small child's chair, facing the bed from the closet. There were no hangers, no other linens, no towels, just this small chair in an empty closet. I know that that's reading into it, and it doesn't sound creepy really, but it was just weird and had a weird vibe about it. Anyway, I brushed it off and we decided to settle in and then go and meet up with some friends in the city. Day turned into night and we all had a bit of a drink and decided to call it an evening at around 1:30 a.m. The four of us head back to the house and we all just went to bed. So usually, when I drink, there's nothing in the world that will wake me up. My head hits the pillow and that is where I still remain until the sun comes up. So, I don't know why it didn't happen this particular night. Maybe it was the feel of the house, but I woke up at around 3 in the morning to a quiet giggle. Like a grown man just giggling. I thought maybe my boyfriend was just giggling in his sleep, but then the giggling started getting louder, and it sounded like it was coming from outside our window, in fact. But the window was actually located behind the bed and above our heads, so I quietly snuck up to see if I could see anything, and there was nothing. There was no one out there, but it went quiet when I looked, and the giggling had stopped. So I was about to just go back to sleep, but then it started back up again. And this time, I knew that it wasn't my boyfriend, and I knew that it wasn't the other couple too. The giggling grew louder and louder too until it was just full-blown hysterical laughter right outside of our window at 3 a.m. I felt my boyfriend's hand clench mine, and I didn't even know that he was awake. I asked him, "Did you bring your gun?" And he said, "No, but I have a knife." He asked if I saw anything out there, and I said no, I couldn't, and the laughing stopped after about 15 minutes. We stayed up until about 4 a.m. just looking outside the window, making sure that the laughter didn't come back, and when we did finally go back to sleep, we woke up the next morning and we asked the people if they heard anything, and they said no. In fact, they thought that we were kind of crazy. One of them even suggested that I dreamt it. But how did my boyfriend and I both dream that there was just some random person laughing their heads off outside of our bedroom window? I can't tell what's creepier, to be honest. The fact that we heard that at 3 a.m. in this creepy house right next to our window, or that when I looked outside, there was just nothing there. I guess you can chalk it up to my not being able to see it. Or maybe this person was directly under our window. But why would someone do that? Why would someone just stay for 15 minutes outside of a house giggling and laughing, and then just presumably leave? Nothing happened after that, and we went back home, but to this day, my boyfriend and I still bring it up as one of the creepiest things to ever happen to us. I don't know why that guy was there, and if he was trying to maybe bait me to open my window or something, but I'm sure glad that I never found out. So this happened about 2 weeks ago at a rest stop. My girlfriend and I are driving back to Los Angeles from Arizona, and stop at one on the 10E just after the valley. It's about 2 a.m, but I really have to pee at this point, and she does too. As we pull in, there's a good amount of trucks on one side and cars on our side, but I don't see any people. And it's just got a really creepy vibe about it, and my girlfriend decides that she can wait to pee, so I head to the bathroom while she stays in the car with the doors locked. In the bathroom is a barefoot, very dirty man just sitting on the floor under the sinks watching videos on his phone. That was really weird, but I live in Hollywood, so I just avoid eye contact, do my business, and then just leave. But the girlfriend decides that she does need to go after all, so I walk her to the bathroom and wait outside. There's still no human activity in the rest stop apart from that weird guy sitting under the sink. So we get back into the little Subaru and grab some snacks from the trunk and get in the car. The doors are locked and the engine is on, but we're just sitting there for a minute or two just preparing to go when I catch a glimpse of headlights in my mirror. There's an old 70s massive sedan just slowly passing behind us, and I can see that it's filled with 4 or 5 men. Their windows are down and they pull into the spot immediately next to us. Mind you, I parked nowhere near any other cars, but they pulled up right beside us. Before they came to a stop, my spidey senses began to tingle and I jammed my car into reverse and flew backwards, as I heard their driver yelling, "Hey," to get our attention. And then they put their car into reverse to back up in front of me and block me from leaving too. But thankfully, I'm driving a new Subaru versus their old chunky sedan from the 70s, and without taking an extra beat, I floor it and swerve to avoid them while they back up. We booked it out of the stop, and I did a good 90 on the 10 for a few miles after that. I honestly can't say for sure what would have happened if we stayed, or if we had just let them stop us to ask us questions or whatever, but to be quite honest with you, I don't think that they were there to ask any questions. I can't say for sure what would have happened if we had stayed and talked to the guys, but in all honesty, I don't think that they were there to ask for directions. So I'm an ex-long-haul trucker, and I wasn't on the road for very long collectively. I don't have any ghost Route 66 stories or anything like that, but I do recall one night in particular. So Basically, this is what happened. I was driving through Montana headed east, and my company had miscalculated my mileage, so I requested an emergency fuel up. I got a response with the nearest gas station that I could get approved at. It wasn't exactly close too, so I turn off the main highway and head toward my stop. Mind you, it's completely pitch black at this point. There's no moon, no city light, and I haven't seen any headlights for about an hour now. So I'm cruising down the highway and I see something in the middle of the road at the furthest extent of my headlights. So I slow down, naturally, as I approach it. When I come to pass it, I get one good glance at it and I immediately slam on my brakes as I pass right in the middle of the highway. All I could think was, what the fuck did I just see? So I back up looking into my mirror until I see it's a red silhouette in my brake lights. I pull my brakes and put on my jacket and grab my flashlight and hop out to take a look. I walk to the back of my trailer and put my light on it, and there it was. It was a headless, skinless, mangled corpse. Honestly, I froze and my jaw dropped. I didn't know what I was looking at, and I just stood there in the middle of the highway, in the cold, stagnant air, the only sound being the hum of my truck 50 feet back, just watching the steam rise from this pile of meat. There was no fur, there was no clothing, just a fully intact ribcage with a mess of other miscellaneous bones attached by ligaments. I honestly debated calling the police, as the ribcage looked big enough for someone even my size, but I looked at my phone and I had 0 cell service, and the nearest town was about 50 miles out. When I put my phone away, I flashed my light around, and standing at the end of the road were a handful of coyotes just staring at me. And then they started coming through the fence and trotting my direction. I figured that this is the part where I get back into the truck before I get into a situation. So I did, and I continued on my way. I still to this day do not know if it was human or something else. I mean, it kind of looked human, whatever it was, and whatever had happened to it, I was almost a witness of, I'm pretty sure. I convinced myself that it was more than likely just a deer and was hit by another truck like my own at the highway speeds or something. That would definitely do significant damage, but in retrospect, I've never seen roadkill missing its flesh before. So, yeah, I don't know what the fuck it was, but man, it was creepy. So, the following story happened on the night of Friday the 13th. Me and my girlfriend and 3 other friends were at the time tripping through Europe. Usually, we tried to find a camping ground where we could safely set up our tents for the night, but since some locations we visited were really off-grid, we sometimes just resorted to sleeping in the wilderness, so to speak. We did this about 3 times without, despite the usually creepy surroundings, any significant incidences. The last night of our trip, however, man, it gave us a bit of a scare. So, our last camping location of our trip was located in the Jura area of France, near a river with, on the opposite side of that river, a wildlife park. We planned on only staying one night, but since most of us were tired from the travelling around for 2 weeks, we decided to make it 2 nights in order to make sure that we had enough rest. So, we arrived at the place and everything seemed okay. It was a densely wooded area with mostly unpaved roads, of which most were dead ends, and it seemed to be really quiet, a really unpopulated place. But while driving through the woods, we found a road that led to the riverbed. As we drove down, we noticed loud drunk people were already there, and I jumped out of the car with 2 others to ask, in my best possible French, these people what they were doing there. They answered that they were fishing there and that they would be staying there for a couple of nights. But then I asked if it was okay if we could stay with them for the night, and even though they said it was okay, we decided to search for another spot because we all felt that these people were not the kind of guys that you wanted to spend the night with, if you catch my drift. We jumped back into the car, and after debating what we should do, we decided to drive further along the road in order to see if there were any other roads that led to the riverbed. After only a couple of minutes of driving through this rough terrain, we found a road that led to the most beautiful place that, honestly, I've ever seen. As it was already dark at this point in time, we didn't see what the road was like when we drove down, so at this moment, we hardly noticed the mud and the rocks sticking out of it. After a bumpy descent, we reached our beautiful spot and set up our tents, and everything was perfect. The following day, we were just relaxing and swimming and just having a good time when me and the main driver of the group, Joey, we decided to go to a store to get some snacks and drinks and whatnot. As we were driving up the road, we noticed something that we hadn't seen the night before. Mud and a single giant rock were blocking our path. After discussing the issue, we decided to dig the bastard out, and we hoped that after we did this, we could continue driving up the road. As we were digging, a man and his dog came down the road with an old SUV and saw us struggling with the rock. He seemed friendly and told us that he was a local that wanted to go for a swim and offered to tow us out of there. As he was doing so, he told us that he had towed many people out of there before and that we should park the car on a less steep part of the road, which was a lot farther back from our camping spot, mind you, when we got back from the store. When our car was towed to a more drivable part of the road, the man took off to swim at another spot. I know that this seems trivial, but according to my friends, this is an important part of the story. So we went to get our groceries, and when we arrived, we parked our car near the spot the man had advised us to park. We took our things and walked down the road to find our friend had achieved the impossible. He actually dug out the entire rock. But the only thing that we needed to do was roll the rock off the newly dug pit to the side of the road and fill up the hole it had left in the road. We did just that, and we were able to drive the car back to our camping spot without any problems. This is a very vital part to the story too, because without the car, the following part of the story would have been a whole lot more creepy. As night fell, we decided to have dinner. Now, our camping spot consisted of two main parts. We had the dead end of the road where we set up our tents, and we had a narrow trail off about, say 30 meters long that led to a small peninsula. When we were on this peninsula, we had no vision of the tents due to the slight elevation and the density of the trees and all that. But because this peninsula was just so beautiful, it truly had an idyllic view on the river and the wildlife park on the opposite side of the river, we decided to have dinner there instead. Me and my girlfriend and one of the other friends started preparing our meals while the other two just remained near the tents to just have some time together. They're a couple and all. As we were preparing dinner, I got a bit bored and got one of the inflatable boats to pedal around on the river and look at the stars in. Nothing creepy had happened so far, but when I got back, however, my girlfriend and the friend there had heard a few dogs barking really aggressively about 50 to 100 meters away from camp. Since it was a pretty untouched area, and since we knew the fishermen we encountered before had dogs with them, we initially didn't think much of it, to be honest. Some time went by, though, and I noticed that I hadn't seen Joey and his girlfriend in some time, so I decided to go up the pathway to our tents to look for them. I called their names, but I didn't get any answer. Still not expecting anything had happened, I go on gathering some supplies for dinner. Suddenly, however, and remember, it's pitch black at this point, I only had my torch on me. The two friends that I couldn't find, they ran down the road in my direction in a total panic. In the meantime, I heard the dogs barking again, and this time, they seemed closer than 100 meters. As my friends saw me, they started explaining what happened. Apparently, they wandered off up the road about 150 meters or so from the tents to sit and watch the river or something when they heard footsteps coming in their direction. Because they didn't have a torch or phone with a light on them, they initially got scared and Joey started shouting, "Who's there?" but got no answer. They then decided to go back to camp because things were getting a little bit creepy. When they got up and started walking, they noticed the footsteps were still going in their direction. Pretty terrified at this point, they decided to run, and as they did, the footsteps behind them went faster and faster until Joey and his girlfriend were near the car where my light was shining on them. It was only when they stopped into my light that the footsteps, they stopped too. As they told me this, the dogs were still going crazy. Not knowing whether there was a real danger too, I decided to get into the car, which was, thanks to the great digging work of the other friend, near our tents now. So we stepped into the car with me in the driver's seat and the other two in the back. I locked the car and put on the headlights, shining up the road. Of course, my girlfriend and the other friend were still on the peninsula cooking dinner. Joey got out to get them, while the dogs were still barking in the same manner they did before. And when everyone got in the car, we tried to rationalize what had happened. Joey seemed a bit more calm than before and shared my opinion. It was probably just an animal, and the dogs that we were hearing were probably reacting to that animal. The others, however, were not as convinced of that. Joey's girlfriend, who was the first to hear the footsteps, swears that they were definitely human. The others followed this idea, and ultimately, we decided to just get our stuff and find some other place to camp. Mind you, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning at this point. So, as we weren't sure if it was safe outside, we remained in the car for a bit to check the surroundings and to hear if the barking would stop. The barking kept on going for a while, but then it just suddenly stopped. And when it stopped, I noticed a shadow crossing the road just where the headlights hit the ground. I have no clue what it was, but it was fast, and as Joey's girlfriend stated, it definitely looked human. After a while, me and the two other men got out of the car and we started packing our stuff in order to just get the hell out of there. One of us kept an eye on the dark woods around us while the other two were packing. We heard the dogs barking again, but not as close as before. And finally, when everything was packed, we got in the car and we got the hell out of there. Now, I'm aware that the thing we encountered is possibly, or maybe even likely, just an animal. But after I did some thinking, it came to my mind that the two things mentioned earlier may have played a part in this. Obviously, we met the fishermen earlier on, and they had dogs, not the sweet golden retriever types too, and these guys seemed a bit eerie. Some of us thought that it could have been one of these guys that tried to sneak up on us. Also, the friendly Frenchman who towed us off the road and advised us to park higher up on the road, he was the only one who knew exactly where we were. A paranoid mind might think that this man may have come back for us and that he had deliberately advised us to park our car somewhere else so that we wouldn't have any form of protection. And last but not least, Joey's girlfriend still insists that she definitely heard human footsteps. Anyway, what or who it was is still pretty unknown to this day, but let's just be happy that nothing too bad happened to us. This story isn't mine, it's actually my grandmother's. And man, were things different in the 50s. This story is actually from her perspective of the event, as she told me. But before I get into it, here's some background information. This was February of 1956. My grandma was 18 at the time and in her freshman year at a large well-known state university in the Northeast Division of the Midwest US. She describes this time in college as the most freedom that she'd ever had, even with her very strict curfew for girls in particular, and an upsetting amount of racism and sexism that fueled school culture both from faculty and from students. The school also had a very secretive approach to matters of crime on campus. So, that's the background, and now to the story. So I was in my first few months of the winter semester when I had come down with Hong Kong flu that had been going around on campus. I remember hating every second of it, especially because I had to get my very first shot of penicillin. We had a lot more space on campus than there is now in those days, so in order to prevent my roommate from getting sick, they had me boarding in a different room that was on the first floor of my actual dorm room, only in a new wing that was still having the finishing touches added to it. I had unpacked my belongings for my stay until I was no longer contagious and decided to do some homework since my stomachache was keeping me up anyway. From my room, I could see maintenance workers doing their jobs and getting the additional rooms ready, due to the fact that the flu was running rampant on campus and there was going to be a greater need for convalescent rooms for students to recover in without getting others sick. I'd been sitting at my desk just doing my homework with hair curlers in and my pajama shirt on and underwear. After a few hours of homework, I realized it was about 10 o'clock, so I decided to get some rest and continue tomorrow. I'm not sure how long I was asleep, but out of nowhere, my locked door was open and the lights were turned on. I immediately woke up thinking that there was some sort of fire on campus or emergency or something. I held the cover up to my chin, sitting up to see this man who seemed to be in his late 40s closing the door behind him as he walked into my room. As I heard the door shut and lock, I then realized that an emergency alert was not on this man's agenda for the night. I thought it was really odd that he had turned the lights on because it allowed me to notice every single detail about this man. He walked towards me, putting his finger over his lips, which led me to notice how awful his complexion was and how bright red his hair color was. He was wearing a suede rust-colored bomber jacket and these green corduroy pants. As he was walking towards me, the only thought that could form in my brain was how I was not about to let this man see me in my pajama shirt and undies. He seemed to walk towards me in a slow-motion sort of way. As he got near me, I realized that he was carrying an unusually sharp screwdriver with him. But for some reason, in my panicked state, all I could think about was him seeing me in my pajama shirt and underwear, so I decided to engage with this man. I said to him, "What are you doing in here? I'm very sick and you're going to get sick too." He said, "Just be quiet and you won't get hurt." At this point, he's right beside me in my twin-size bed holding the screwdriver to my throat. I held the covers as close to my face as possible because, my pajamas and all again. I kept going on about how I had Hong Kong flu, saying that he was going to get sick, when all of a sudden, he just snapped at me, pushing harder into my neck with this screwdriver. He interrupted my speech on contagious airborne illness with a harsh, "Shut up, you stupid little girl. Be quiet and let me see your body." I don't know why, but for some reason, I decided to stay on course with my original story of not screaming, but instead just talking his ear off about all the different ways that he could be getting sick right now, and how that would be such a shame and all. He looked at me with this puzzled look on his face as to why I wasn't letting him get a single word in off his "shut up" interjections, regardless of how many times he threatened me. I then noticed that his grip on me began to slowly loosen, and he eventually made his way walking backwards before dashing out of my room. I know for a fact that I heard him exit through the fire door exit next to me, but found it odd that the alarm hadn't gone off. At that moment, the seriousness of the situation flooded me, and I just burst into tears, running and screaming towards the RA who had been napping in the office. From there, the campus police were called, but because of their blatant disregard for my account of the events, they told me that I was being hysterical and that it was only a bad dream. As soon as I had told them that he had escaped through the fire door but the alarm hadn't gone off, my story was chalked up to me being over-emotional over a bad dream or something. I didn't expect to hear anything else regarding this, in fact, and I hadn't told my parents out of fear that they wouldn't let me finish off my degree. They were never happy about me attending college because they felt that they were spending money for me to just become a housewife. However, about a week later, I had campus police come to me asking me to come with them. I had no idea why they needed me and hardly spoke to me the entire time, in fact. All they told me to do was walk up to a bench full of men, identify the one that I had dreamt about, and leave. It wasn't until nearly a year later that I found out what that was. Apparently, a week later, a young woman had been found dead, sexually assaulted, and covered in stab wounds, specifically around her neck. Me identifying my dream assailant was the confirmation they needed to link him to her murder. This man had been hired as an electrician for the school's new buildings and wings, so he had access to the keys of the newly renovated room that I had been in, which explained how he got into the locked room. This also explained how he was able to exit the fire door with no alarm sounding. I'm guessing that he did what electricians do and found a way to disarm it. I was left in the dark about all of this and only found out from begging my RA to explain at least some details regarding the case. All I know now is that this man was found guilty and was sent to the state hospital for the criminally insane. I No, nothing else really. Looking back, I guess I was lucky in that moment. My only concern was that I didn't want this man to see me in my pajamas, because had I recognized the real danger I was in, who knows how I would have reacted or how he would have responded. Anyways, my grandma was unable to answer any more questions regarding the details of what happened to him because the school was very strict about keeping this quiet. They didn't want the word getting around that it was someone that they had hired. They did their best to handle this as secretively as possible so that other students or parents weren't alarmed, and my grandma was sent on her way, never really informed on the case after this, and was never updated on the whereabouts of her little visitor for the remainder of her time at the university. G'day mates, it's Busta here, and I hope you guys enjoyed this week's stories. So, I just wanted to remind you guys quickly that I actually launched a new weekly podcast, Be.Scared, a little while back that you can check out if you wish. It's a Castbox original, so I hope you check it out on Castbox, but it's also available everywhere you normally listen to podcasts to today. I'm adding a link in the description below so that you guys can subscribe there if you wish, and the podcast will be weekly and will feature stories from No Sleep, series stories, and the occasional set of true scary stories too. It's completely free to subscribe there, and you can even download the Castbox app on your phone so you don't miss anything. And it would actually be really cool if you guys could review the podcast too, as it should help with rankings and all that stuff. Also, I just want to thank you guys for tuning in every week and being here. Without all of you guys, this podcast would have never happened, so thank you guys for being so supportive and tuning in every week. I'm actually super excited to be able to share this with you guys, and it's been really cool to see so many of you guys come on over, so thanks again everyone. As always, it would also be great if you could like, share, and subscribe, and thanks so much for listening guys, and I'll see you mates in the next one.